Welcome to Previously on X-Men, the podcast that looks at X-Men comics, movies, shows, characters, and more. Today I have a very special guest. Blood of my blood. My twin sister, Allison.
Hi.
That's Allison. Hi, Al. How are you?
I'm doing well. This is very exciting for me.
Are you happy to be here to talk about Legion?
Yes. Okay, I'm not going to nerd out yet, but yes, I'm very excited.
So we can look forward to some nerding out.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
Allison is a trained psychologist as well, so I might...
Not a clinic... Okay.
I might ask her for some...
Clarify.
I knew you were going to do that.
I had a conversation yesterday where someone did that. You're like, oh, you're gonna try to figure out what my mental problems are.
Psychologist.
No, that's not what I do.
You know how brains function.
Yeah.
It's valuable insight.
I don't know how to diagnose you.
So I'm not going to ask you to diagnose anybody. Calm down.
Okay.
Okay, so today we are talking about Legion,
Yes.
the FX TV series from 2017 to 2019. And I think we can probably blame a lot of the turmoil of 2020 to Legion ending in 2019.
You think so?
I think probably, yeah.
You know, just as an aside, I just found out that apparently FX was like the first network to intentionally try to hire equal men and women directors.
Oh, that's neat.
And like did it. Like they had 50-50 men and women directors, and they're like, hey, listen, it's possible if you actually try. And like,
good for them.
Go FX. I was like, I don't really care about FX, but now I kind of am happy.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that. Go FX. Do you know anything about just the character of Legion?
The only thing I knew going into the show was that he had some sort of mental disorder involving multiple personalities.
That's pretty good.
And that and again, this might be wrong, but that each personality was responsible for a different power that he had.
Oh my gosh, how did you know that?
Probably talking to you. But then, like, it was interesting because with that in mind, the whole first part of the show, I was like trying to figure out, okay, wait a minute, this doesn't seem exactly the same. And like, is that an aspect of his personality that this little boy character is appearing? It sort of made it more intriguing, I think, that I knew at least that much.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that, like, I wonder about like what the perception is of people who know the lore versus people who have no idea, who just like dropped into it, like what their differing experiences are of that show. But I guess I'll kind of give a little bit of a rundown on the Legion character. He was created by Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz. And he first appeared in the New Mutants comic, the first time that they had a run back in 1985 in number 25. He has kind of a little arc in there, and then it's over, and then he kind of comes back a couple times in Uncanny X-Men and X-Factor and the regular X-Men run and those kinds of things. And that's when things come in with, you know, the Shadow King and all these different kind of
So Shadow King was exclusively Legion related, right? Had he also been... Okay.
No. It's interesting because the show sort of mixes a couple different parts of the comic Legion's story.
Okay.
Because in the comics, Legion is Xavier's son, and Gabrielle Haller is his mother. In the comics, she never told Xavier that he existed. Okay. So he is completely unaware that he has a son at all. And his power and like his psyche shattering situation happens because at some point in his, like when he's a baby, some people try to attack his godfather. I mean, it feels like really convoluted for stuff that all happens kind of off screen. But,
okay.
But basically,
so there's like a whole big text box explaining
I
this
mean,
in the comics.
sort of.
Back when I was a baby.
But like it's this whole thing because he was a baby and he was with his godfather, and someone came, like terrorists came and killed his godfather, and they were gonna kill David, and he sort of reflexively lashed out with his power
and killed them all.
He killed them. He like disintegrated their minds or whatever, but
That's
one
fun.
of them,
Okay.
he sort of accidentally sucks into his brain.
And that's the Shadow
So it's
King?
not the Shadow King.
Okay.
So that's sort of like part of what the show uses.
Yeah.
Because it's that, like, getting something into his, like, another personality.
So is that, like, the
into
first
his brain.
personality, basically? So it's not that he, even in the comics, it's not that he clinically had multiple personality disorder.
It's kind of hard, because there's never a time that I've read where they sit down and are like, here's exactly what the situation is. Because he does have multiple personalities. As he grows up, he has multiple personalities.
But they're actual people.
They refer to him as schizophrenic. No. There's one that's a real person.
Oh.
And the others are not.
Interesting.
And so it's never really determined if he always would have been schizophrenic or if that it's event because sort of that first event.
I'm trying to like line this up with what we know about actual multiple personality disorder.
I know. Every time I talk about it,
because schizophrenia is different.
Well, remember, because this comic was in the 80s, and back in the 80s, those were kind of interchangeable.
But they're not, though.
No, I know, but like they would call them the same kind of thing.
Like in pop culture, yeah, okay.
So
they actually use the word schizophrenia?
They refer to him as schizophrenic.
Okay, gotcha.
They refer to him as schizophrenic, and also that he has multiple personalities.
I mean, it's possible for someone to have both, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, if anybody's going to, I guess it's going to be David Heller, because he has all the things.
Yep.
So anyway, that's the first thing in the comic.
Okay.
He absorbs this terrorist into his brain.
Does he talk to him?
Well, what happens in the first arc, in the New Mutants arc, Gabrielle has him until he's like a teenager or something. They say he's autistic. I think what they mean is that he is sort of non-responsive to people. He's catatonic for the first half of his life.
Oh, wow.
And then he's just very non-responsive. But they also say that he's schizophrenic. So I think it's a lot of kind of like loose understanding of psychology. Sure. But then he sort of cracks somehow, and she decides she needs to get help. So she calls Xavier and is like, so I need help. She doesn't initially tell him, even still. She brings him there and without saying. She's just like, I have this.
Him on him.
My son is having problems. And then it figures out. But anyway, the X-Men go there to help, and they end up having to go into his mind, and there's a whole astral plane situation.
The astral plane stuff in the show is so cool, by the way. Sorry. Anyway, go.
And then they face... See, now I'm going to end up mixing up because I've read several different runs. But I think in this one, there's like 3 personalities, and one of them is like pretending to be good, and one of them is like a kid, and then there's one that's like hidden away that's like the real David. But I guess it turns out that the terrorist guy who legit did come to kill him has now spent these years trapped inside his brain and has sort of come to get to know him, and like now he wants to help him.
Definitely co-opt that for the show.
There's a lot that they do.
That's interesting.
So that's one thing. And then they sort of solve that a little bit, and then there's a lot... We've complained in this podcast before about Xavier and his sort of not super ethical stuff that he does, like with like getting into people's brains and things. And like this is just another example, because I mean, he didn't know about David, and he acts like he would have totally been there for him and all this stuff. But they solve this whole situation, and then that's just like it. Like it's just it until the next time they do a Legion arc.
Well, is that just because of the way they write like different runs of characters, and so they're like, okay, the Legion arc has been finished, so let's just talk about... So then, I don't know. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they were trying to write it like he was being neglectful.
But then that's essentially
But that's just sort of what ends up happening.
Right.
And you just sort of get these weird, like... You just touch back in with Legion, like, later in his life, and you're just sort of like... Well, I mean, shouldn't you be in communication or whatever? But anyway, the next time you see him, I think is leading up to the Age of Apocalypse. It's in Uncanny X-Men and X-Factor. There's a lot of crossover stuff happening. And this is when the Shadow King comes in. So this is the kind of the other half of what they use in the show, because the Shadow King has been defeated previously by Xavier and his body destroyed, and now he's trapped in the astral plane, and he's been accumulating power in the astral plane, and he has kind of avatars that are just people that he sort of embodies, he takes over their bodies.
Like Jermaine Clement.
Yes. Yeah. And there's nothing really with Legion for a while, but then at the very end, they do something. They like destroy his current avatar or something, and he just sort of has to pick a body, or he'll disappear, and he just goes into Legion.
Well, that's interesting.
And then it's like, well, crap.
Yeah, now he has all the power in the universe, yeah.
Yeah, so when you have the show, it's sort of combining those two elements.
Yeah, the
of
terrorist.
Something happening when he's a baby and absorbing an identity.
Yeah, but that's interesting because that now makes the Shadow King experience that arc of, I'm actually adopting this person
which is
as a
super
child.
Interesting.
Which definitely makes it interesting. He's not just a pure villain.
So that's sort of his like, the character's background in the comics. He also appears, I don't think he ever shows up in the animated series.
Is the Shadow King, like, what is is he just a
The Shadow King is, I mean, I think that the way that the show portrays his general thing is basically right.
Like, he just jumps from
He's
body
a very
to body.
Powerful psychic who got into a thing with Xavier.
And lost.
And lost
his body.
But his psyche lives on in the astral plane.
Gotcha, okay.
And so in the comics, there's a lot of him, like, going around and trying to... This whole thing where he's, like, he feeds off of people's strife, and so he's, like, causing hate riots and all this kind of thing. Uh-huh. So it's a little more political, I think, and more external.
Right.
But yeah, it's the same general kind of thing. That right now he's just sort of like in a mind that is malevolent.
Gotcha.
And super powerful.
Okay.
He doesn't seem to show up in the animated series, but he does have an episode in, do you remember X-Men Evolution?
I watched that show and I don't remember.
I know. It's in, I think it's the 4th season, which I remember when we were younger, we would see the first couple seasons a whole bunch.
Yeah.
I think because they would rerun them before the later seasons came out. Mm-hmm. But he's in the 4th season, and I wonder if you'd recognize it, because I watched it yesterday, kind of in preparation for this, and I'm pretty sure I have seen it before, but it didn't really mean anything to me at the time. Like, I wasn't, like, up on the Legion character or anything. But that's actually, it was a really interesting episode, because they do it a little differently. Legion have 3 personalities, and they're visually different. Like, people see him as different, almost like he has like a morphing power or something. But he has the initial powers of telepathy, telekinesis, and pyrokinesis, which are what he originally had in the comics. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole thing where he's, like, on an island in Scotland, and he, like, takes on Jean a little bit, which is always interesting. Mm-hmm. And the thing I like about that episode, spoiler alert, is that at the very end, Xavier is trying to combine the personalities, to, like, make him a whole person.
Yeah.
And at the very end, he's, like, reaching for the core personality, and you don't know what's going to happen. And I was like, they better not, like, make it a happy ending, because this is Legion,
Yeah, right.
And you know what? They didn't. His mean personality won out, and then he flies away, and that is it.
Good for them.
That's just it. Mm-hmm. And I always love that. Mm-hmm. When people are brave enough to just have a sucky ending.
Yeah, there's some sort of similarities between Legion and Primal Fear. I don't know if you remember that one.
Oh, yeah. Oh, don't spoil Primal Fear for people.
But if you're interested in those sorts of things, go to Primal Fear.
Primal Fear is a great movie. I love that movie. It has similar kind of, like, almost spooky vibes with just how, like, off-kilter it keeps you and everything.
Right.
Yeah. So it was in X-Men Evolution. It's also, he's referenced in the X-Men anime, which you and I need to
I haven't seen
watch.
That. Yeah.
But that's kind of the general history of Legion as a dude. Mm-hmm. And then we get this show, Legion. The show is created by Noah Hawley, who also does the Fargo show. Not the movie, the show.
I loved.
That?
I've only seen the first season of it, but now that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
because it's similarly experimental. Yeah,
I should watch that. I don't, because
it's very bloody.
That's the thing. Yeah, like, I'm not super into
bloody.
That,
but it's the same sort of, like, very character driven, and, like, you're just sort of engrossed in the terrible decisions that people are making. Mm-hmm. But it's believable. Like, what they're doing is absolutely believable as they're doing horrible things.
Yeah.
And just very compelling because of that.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's, there's a lot of that sort of thing in Legion, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, the more I hear about Noah Hawley, the more I'm like, this might be my guy. Mm-hmm. I like this guy. It ran on FX for 27 episodes from February of 2017 to August of 2019. 3 seasons. And it sounds like, it was canceled, but they must have given them enough time.
Oh, it was canceled.
To wrap things up. Yeah, like I get the impression.
Felt like a good length to me.
That's what I was thinking. Mm-hmm. Like it feels like a show you love, you would love for it to keep going, but it seems like it was just
like, what else could you have
made
done?
for 3 seasons?
Yeah, I'm not upset that they ended after 3.
I remember because when I was watching it, you watched it before I watched it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was finishing it up, I was like in the middle of season 3 and I texted you and I was like, does it end? Or is this going to be a cliffhanger?
Yeah.
And you were like, it ends.
It ends.
Whew.
It actually has an ending.
That was a relief. Jeff Russo does the score. He also does the score for Fargo.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And he's the guy who does...
Not for the movie, though, I'm assuming.
Oh, I don't think so. I think the show.
Because that's a very iconic score.
I don't know anything about the Fargo.
I'm not even going to try to sing it, but it's a very good score.
Anyway. I know there's a body and a wood chipper. It's the only thing I know.
Body and a wood chipper.
It's the only thing I know about Fargo.
That's another good movie.
He also does Discovery, Star Trek Discovery.
The music for it?
Mm-hmm. Does the music for that and for Picard.
You don't like the music for that?
The music is the only good thing about Picard.
Okay. I haven't watched the second season. Don't tell me anything.
Oh, Allison.
Don't tell me anything. It can't be as bad as the most recent season of Discovery. There's no way.
Oh, you don't even know.
Hillary, no.
Oh, you don't even know.
Okay.
I'll go through the cast a little bit and then we can get chatting.
Okay.
Dan Stevens is the title character. He's Legion. Mm-hmm. Although we know him through almost all of the show just as his regular name, David Haller.
Okay.
The younger version of him, this is actually pretty interesting. Luke Rossler plays the young, like the little kid version, not like the teenager version, like the insanely adorable, impish little kid version
in bed
of David.
When his dad's reading book.
Yeah. That actor appears in Deadpool 2 as this kid eating cereal in a home for like troubled children.
Huh.
And so he's only credited as Serial Kid, and he's not called David, or there's nothing.
Yeah.
But it feels
like they did that on purpose.
Like it's maybe, like it could just be that they'd worked with him before and whatever. But like it just feels like it could be just that it's him.
Timeline-wise,
and it's
does that work?
Well, the timeline is all over the place with this show anyway. Mm-hmm. But I don't know.
It's a cool connection.
Yeah, it feels like it could be a thing. Then we've got Rachel Keller, who's Sid. The woman.
Oh, okay, yeah, love interest.
Yes.
I mean, that's interesting, because I don't usually like describing characters by like, this is love interest of character A, but that's kind of... They develop her better than other
later in the series she ends up getting a lot more development, but
but it almost felt intentional. It almost felt like that was sort of, not to go off into but like that was sort of, from his perspective, he is such sort of like an innocent, childlike person in the very first season, and so like him looking at her as like, oh, I want to date you, and like they're almost like elementary school kids dating each other, then I guess it was okay not to develop her character in that sense, because it's like, well, he doesn't really know her at all.
The first season especially really does feel like it's like you're not seeing the real world. All you're seeing is David's perspective on what's happening.
And I loved that, because you're like, okay, did that actually happen? Like the entire time you're questioning whether or not any of the events are either have happened or happened in the way that you thought that they did.
Yeah.
Which was so great. Like, I remember George and I, when we were watching it, my husband George, we were, like, even paying attention to, like the colors and, like, is the fact that that's colored red, does that mean that that's not real?
The scarf?
Yeah.
Sid, okay, the character's name is Sydney Barrett. That's her full name, which, by the way, is the name of the co-founder of Pink Floyd.
What?
Which has to be a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool.
But Sid... There's like a whole chunk of time when she is wearing all black and a red scarf.
Right.
And I was just staring at that red scarf the whole time being like, does this mean she's not real? Does this mean she's lying?
Yeah.
Like, what does this mean? And it's just, the show is just filled.
And Lenny, the whole
like
time, you're like, are you real?
Yeah.
Are you a real character?
Yeah. It's
like,
awesome.
are you just completely fake?
It's so awesome. And Lenny, speaking of which, is played by Aubrey Plaza.
So good.
Who I initially knew
Give her an award.
From Parks and Rec,
Yeah. It's been fun to sort of see her take on different kinds of roles.
Her career is really kind of like
time.
growing. Yeah, it's nice that she seems to be getting kind of the opportunity to do interesting things and not just like be the mean girl and whatever.
Right.
But yeah, so she's Lenny, who is a friend of David's in the beginning and sort of plays a role throughout the whole show, and I think she is just incredible.
Stellar. She does
from
such a good job.
the very beginning. And like later in the show, she has a lot more opportunity to do some like really weird stuff.
Yeah.
But like from her first line, she is just fascinating to watch, and you're just like, what is going on with this person? She'll just be sitting in a chair and you're just like, what is happening in her brain?
Any scene she's in, you're just like focusing on what she's doing.
She is incredible.
Trying to like get inside her mind and understand why she's doing certain things.
Yeah.
Like the part where she like goes off and buys an oven or something.
Yes.
And like brings
and it's like pushing it around on like a dolly or something.
Like it's just so
She's crazy. I like her way of doing crazy, because I feel like there's sort of a way that actors act crazy.
Yeah.
And they sort of like do like a head tilt and like do kind of like a menacing thing. But she's just so exactly her. She's just like this crystallized character.
Yeah, and she does like it reminds me of something else, and I'll think of it if I do. I'll mention it. But like the type of show where you're watching and the character could do literally that. It reminds me of The Dark Knight. That's why, like the Joker is such a compelling character because you have no idea what he's going to do next, and he's capable of anything. And that's like it's not. I don't think Lenny was as menacing as that.
She doesn't have the latent violence,
right?
as much.
But that same sort of like instability and like. That makes it interesting to watch her, because you're like, you could do anything.
Yeah. And you believe it.
And I want to see what you're going to do. Yeah.
You just believe what she's showing you, that she could just...
Yeah.
She could snap. She could just like anything.
Also...
Then we've got the two Carries.
Yeah. They're... Okay. Okay.
Well, let me just say...
I have opinions.
It's Bill Irwin as the male Carrie.
Who's the clown from Sesame Street.
He's the clown from Sesame Street.
I didn't know that until afterwards.
Oh,
so
really?
I watched through all of Legion. And then my kids started watching...
Not Mr. Pickles.
Mr. Noodles.
Like Mr. Noodle!
Yeah.
He's Mr. Noodle.
I didn't know that. And so I was watching Sesame Street and I was like, what are you doing here?
Okay, listen. I had my son before Allison had her girls. And so I knew him as Mr. Noodle. And then I'm watching this like deeply cerebral, surreal horror thing. And I'm like, Mr. Noodle? What are you doing,
That's funnier
Mr. Noodle?
than watching it afterwards.
But it's funny because like he's this trained clown and like has this way with his body and all this stuff, and it's so interesting to see how they use that throughout the show. It's so interesting. But he's the male Carrie. Then there's a female Carrie.
Did they spell their names differently?
They do. It's Cary is the male Carrie, and Kerry is
so neither of them
female.
spell their names the way I would have thought. That's interesting.
Yeah, they are. Those are both kind of interesting ways to spell it. The female is Amber Midthunder.
I don't think I had seen her in anything else.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this was the first time I'd seen her in something. But so their whole thing is weird. These are all mutants, so they all have weird stuff happening. But that's them. And Jeremy Harris is Ptonomy. We've got Jean Smart, who is fabulous, as Melanie Bird. Jean Smart, she's in Fargo.
Jean Smart.
She's the blonde.
The blonde.
She's like the leader person.
Oh, okay. She was in Fargo?
Yeah.
I recognized her from something else.
She's in everything.
Because she reminds me of Murphy
you know what
Brown.
She's in?
She's not Murphy Brown, but she reminds me of Murphy Brown.
You know what she's in? She's in, I'm pretty sure, I'm going to look it up. I'm pretty sure she's in, what's it called? What's that one with the blue guy? Everything's really dark.
The blue guy.
Yeah, he's like a god.
Oh, yeah.
What's that called?
Watchmen.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, and I'm just going to look it up, make sure I'm not making that up, that she's in the show.
Dr. Manhattan.
The Watchmen show, which is fantastic. Have you seen the show?
I haven't seen the show yet. No, I've heard good things.
Oh, so good. I haven't seen the movie. Jean Smart, yeah, she's in.
Well,
she's
if you
in
can handle
Watchmen
the show, you can handle Fargo, Hillary. My goodness.
Yeah,
that's pretty bloody.
True. Yeah, but yeah, you should watch that. But yeah, so Jean Smart is in Fargo. She's in the Watchmen series. She's been kind of having a big like explosion in her career lately. She's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, she does a great job.
Then Jermaine Clement,
I love him,
shows up.
I love that
Bird.
you don't even see him for like so many episodes. You just hear his voice in the coffee maker, and you're like, I know who that is.
Oh, you knew who it was? I didn't know who it was.
When she was talking to the coffee maker, and she was like treating it like her husband.
What's the thing that you know him from?
Flight of the Conchords.
Okay.
And he was also in What We Do in the Shadows.
I love
the
that
movie. And he was in, most recently, what was it? Oh, yeah, he was the voice of the crab in Moana.
He's so good at that.
Yeah.
Oh, I love
also,
that.
he was Boris in one of the Men in Black movies.
Oh, really?
Villain. It's just Boris.
Oh my gosh, I didn't remember that.
He's like, he's all made up, so you can't really tell.
Yeah. That's so fun.
I love him so much.
He's one where it's like just the casting works for the weird tone of the show.
Yeah.
Because you don't see him for so long and like you really latch on to the Jean Smart character. Mm-hmm. Then when you find out that it's him,
also,
and it's just like in a completely
he's
different
in like
tone.
A diving suit for so long.
Yeah,
too. Like
which
you
is
don't even
so
see his face
mysterious
for such a long time.
And stuff. And then it's just
so
Jermaine Clement with his crazy.
I love him.
Is it Australian or is it?
He's from New Zealand.
New Zealand.
Yeah,
with his crazy New Zealand accent and like.
Yeah,
I just
now
love
I've got
it.
that Moana song in my
It's
head.
amazing. Okay, so then the last character I'll mention is Hamish Linklater as Clark Debussy. He's the guy, I knew him from The New Adventures of Old Christine. Do you remember that? With, what's her name?
No,
From
I know
Seinfeld?
who you're talking about. Elaine from Seinfeld.
What is her name? I can't believe
I'm a terrible person. Yeah, one of the greats.
So Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Okay. And he was her brother.
Okay.
Do you remember that?
No.
Oh, well, he's hilarious. And it's funny to see him in this role, too, because he's so serious in this role.
What character is he in this?
He's the guy with the cane who gets burned.
With the cane.
Like his face is half burned.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the guy who's like interviewing him across the table in the swimming pool.
Yeah.
I love him.
He's an actor that I really am excited to see when he shows up in things. He was in Gaslit.
Oh, okay.
With, what's her name? Julia Roberts. It's Julia Roberts. And Dan Stevens!
What?
This is just a rabbit trail, but apparently very relevant. Starz has an upcoming show called Gaslit it stars Julia Roberts and Sean Penn and like some big names. Apparently Hamish is in that, and also Dan Stevens is in that.
Isn't that about some political couple?
Yeah, it's about Martha Mitchell.
Okay.
I always like that when like actors kind of like clump together and like do things together, and you have to assume they sort of recommend each other.
Like all the Tim Burton movies.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's sort of like the general cast. Oh, but I should say Naveed Nagabin shows up a little later in the series. He is Amal Farouk.
He was great too.
Also very good. So that's kind of like the framework that we've got. How would you describe the show to somebody who has never seen anything about it?
I mean, I wouldn't want to give too much information away because you sort of have, like, I like going in blind. Mm-hmm. But, like, generally, it's very cerebral, very sort of, like, psychological, not thriller, but, like, it keeps you questioning. It is not a traditional superhero show.
No.
Like, because... like, if you sort of think of, Guardians of the Galaxy or, like, any of the Marvel movies, there's always, like, this character that you're rooting for that's, like, the good person who's, gonna win the day, and there's some sort of, like, terrible thing that happens, and then they come in and, like, fix everything, and it's like, woo, everyone's happy. And if they try to go dark...
Marvel doesn't super go dark.
Okay, so someone was making the argument that the newer one coming out... What is that movie?
Moon Knight?
Moon Knight, yeah.
That's a show.
So that's been apparently marketed as, like, one of the darker Marvel, blah, blah, blah. And I've been watching it, and I'm like,
It's not.
It's not.
It's not.
It's basically The Mummy, like, in terms of, like, the things that are
in
sort
terms of what is happening,
scarier.
and also in terms of, like, production values.
Yeah. So, like, if that's what Marvel now considers to be sort of darker, like, whatever.
Do you remember back in the day when, like, I mean, this is, like, 10, 15 years ago, when... everyone was like, we have to go dark or we can't do superheroes because you won't take it seriously.
Yeah.
And we were all like, just go comic booky. Come on, just go comic booky and light and fun. Mm-hmm. And now it's like...
now everything is like
that's
that.
That's all we got.
Yeah. Like, we always have to get jokes out of people. Yeah. So I like it because it's not going the direction of Dark Knight where it's like, oh, like gritty and like rah, rah, rah. And it's not going the direction of let's get laughs out of people, although it is funny sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But that's not the point, right? It's telling its own story, and it's doing it in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
Like, I was telling you earlier that the very first scene, I'm like, I love this. Mm-hmm. Just the way, the style of it, and the cinematography, and the color choices, and, like, the fact that you are questioning, especially in the first season, like, is this real, or is this all in his head? Mm-hmm. And going into it, knowing at least a little bit that, this is a villain, a super villain, and you're sort of seeing his origin story, it's like, okay, I know I can't trust him
Yeah.
in that respect. So it's just so fascinating. It's like a character-driven, psychological, like what genre does it fit into? I'm trying to think of other movies it's similar to, and it's really hard.
Well, I know that Noah Hawley has specifically said that he's inspired by David Lynch.
Well, that makes sense.
And like Twin Peaks and like those kinds of things.
Yeah, sort of the eerie.
And just like
why is that person standing over on the side of the screen wearing a red outfit sort of thing? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that's kind of a lot of the style elements are heading in that direction. It's like a surrealism. It's like experimental. I think the thing that is, I mean, there's so much that's good about this show, but I feel like one thing that's really impressive is that it's not trying to be funny or to be any one thing. It's trying to be itself in a very purposeful and controlled way that ends up being insane.
Right.
You know, like it's not just crazy for the sake of being crazy. Like it's all so intentional.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's sort of like it uses symbols and like analogs for things. So I was reading another article like a couple days ago because it's been a while since I've watched this. I watched it not like exactly when it was out, but like pretty close after it was out. And I'd forgotten that all of the battles that they have are rap battles.
Yeah.
And like musical and dance related.
Dances, yeah.
Which is, I just think it's just a fascinating way to present something that is cerebral. Like they're psychics having a fight.
Yeah.
So this is sort of a way for non-psychics to even understand what might be going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of like throughout the entire series, anytime you see something that's like, why does that look like that? And why did they, go on to this particular scene? And why are they like, like just things that are odd? I think that's meant to remind us, you're not a psychic. And so you're an observer trying to understand something that you actually can't understand.
Yes.
Yeah. Which I loved. Yeah.
So cool. Yeah, I really love that. And like so much of the time when you have, I mean, like in the cartoons and stuff, when you'll have an astral plane battle, the best that they can come up with is them just like having a giant fist.
I know.
Or something. You know what I mean? Like they can't they can't shake
Dragon
free.
Ball Z or something.
Yeah. Of it just being an over the top physical battle.
Yeah.
But yeah, the way that this just sort of completely breaks loose of any like reasonable framework.
Yeah. Here's something that is kind of similar in some ways. Scarlet Witch, the Scarlet Witch show.
Yeah,
like I think they did a good job of that sort of thing. Like, okay, you have a mutant who could literally like turn the entire universe into a piece of cake if she wanted to. So how do we deal with her underlying grief at the loss of her most loved person in the entire world?
Yeah.
Well, like let's have her create her own reality in this little bubble. And it's not like dark in the same way, but I thought that was really creative too.
Yeah, I would say that next to Legion, WandaVision is the most creative we've seen from Marvel. And Legion is an official Marvel TV
Why don't they
property.
pull it over to Disney Plus, man? I mean, would it not
Let me tell
work?
you, Disney is a real baby about the X-Men.
You think they wouldn't allow the content?
Baby. I don't know. The more I see about like the interactions, the more it really feels like all they want is for previous X-Men stuff to just go away, and maybe they'll bring in mutants some other way.
It's like one of the most interesting properties. Do they own it?
Yeah, because they bought Box.
Yeah, maybe narratively it's difficult because mutants. There's just like millions of them. And so if you have a universe where like all these people have superpowers, then how do you fit them into the other?
Well, it's always interesting in the comics when you try to put the mutants in the same universe as like the Avengers, or the Fantastic Four or something, because it's like whenever they end up interacting, because they are in the same universe, but most of the time they sort of pretend they don't exist, and like when they do interact, it's like the mutants are their own world that we now have to deal with.
Yeah, we're like jumping into a different reality.
Like they've got their own thing going on.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's like they can't even really reconcile that.
Yeah, which I get.
Because you're right. I mean, an entire race of people with superpowers.
Yeah.
Like who cares if like Captain America's tough. Okay, so at the time it was out, the original X-Men movie franchise was still running. Dark Phoenix hadn't come out yet, so like there was a lot of speculation and like trying to figure out how does this show fit in.
Yeah.
And I guess kind of the idea was that they sort of tried to keep it so that they didn't have to
make any connections,
worry about continuity with the movies.
Yeah.
But it is supposed to be sort of in the universe. And something I noticed, which was really interesting, last night I rewatched the first episode again. Mm-hmm. And there's this part where Clark, the government guy, is talking to a higher up about David. And he says that, like, David is probably the most powerful mutant we've ever interacted with. Mm. And the higher up guy says, well, that's saying something considering what happened at Red Hook.
Interesting.
And I was like, I don't really know what that is. And so I just Googled it, and I was like, well, Red Hook is where, in the Dark Phoenix movie, Phoenix goes nuts and, like, kills a bunch of people.
Yeah.
So it feels like that must have been on purpose, because Dark Phoenix started filming in 2017, which is when the first season of Legion came out. So this is like, that close kind of, together.
That kind of connection I'm okay with, where it's just like a subtle thing like that.
Yeah.
Because then the show can sort of, it's not constrained.
Yes.
To like making sure it hits all the beats.
Which I think is what they were really trying to do, because I appreciate that they didn't do what some shows do, where they like do stuff to make it so it can't be a part of that universe,
right?
Where they're just like taking a stand and like, we're not that character's dead, so he can't be, or whatever, So I like that it does kind of like walk that line a little bit, and I thought that was a really interesting little thing that I saw. And I saw a bunch of Reddit things from the time, from 2017, and being like, what's Red Hook? Oh, it must be something that happens with mutants, but I guess we'll never know, because they didn't have, because Dark Phoenix doesn't come out until 2019.
That's interesting.
And so at the time, they had no way of knowing that was an actual reference.
Like in the comics or
anything. I don't think so. I think it's only in that movie.
That's interesting.
I know. Isn't that funny? Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's just a random little thing. So I watched it pretty recently. You introduced it to me, actually, because when it first came out, I was like vaguely interested, but it was marketed as very much like a horror show.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I was just like, I don't know if this is, and I knew that Legion was like evil, and so I was like, I don't know if this
Let me tell you, it was scary though. The first season, the different, like the masked boy character, and the beast that you only ever see the yellow eyes of initially was really scary. I was just like, oh, this is so good. And also just like there are certain things that just happen on screen that just sort of like you just remember. So like the scene where he's in the middle of the kitchen and he just goes like this with his head over his ears and like screams, but you don't actually hear him screaming, and then all of the silverware bursts out of the drawers.
Yeah, all like the drawers come out and everything. It's like so completely filled. Like there's nothing, no space in the room.
It's beautiful, and it's so interesting because like you're sort of set up to root for him having these powers, and so it creates this really interesting tension, because later on you're like, oh wait, if we can't trust him to make good choices about his powers, this is great. Bad.
Yeah.
Like, and it's interesting too, because then part of it is, well, is this actually him making these poor decisions, or is it the Shadow King making these poor decisions?
There's so much.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so the first season is basically about us getting to know David and like what the heck his deal is. And so it's hard because it's very specifically, the entire show is created to be nonlinear. And so like trying to tell the plot is a little tricky.
Yeah.
But basically we're getting to know David. We first meet him in like an asylum, basically, like a mental health asylum, where we understand that he is supposed to be delusional and believes that he's delusional. And then we sort of discover that he has these powers, and then we don't know if he's delusionally having powers or if he really has powers. And so the whole first season is sort of figuring that out. And like he gets like rescued by these people with Jean Smart and all of them, who sort of help him get to know his own mind and all that stuff. We get through the mystery of the Shadow King, like of what's going on with his brain.
Yeah, because you always have this part where he goes into his mind and he's in his bed as a kid. His dad is reading a book to him, which is really creepy.
Such a creepy book.
It's such a creepy book. like talking about, you know, I think it rhymes.
The angriest boy in the world is what it's called.
And that's the masked boy that he keeps seeing. And like cutting off his mom's head, and you're like, okay, so did you kill your mom? You know, and like the person who's reading to him, you don't see his face for the longest time. Do you ever even see his face?
I don't think so.
Like, so like, is that the Shadow King who's like reading this creepy book to him and like controlling his actions? And then like the door opening, like the scene where that team of people who are sort of trying to help him, and the one character, I don't remember his name, but he can like sort of control where you go in someone's memories.
Autonomy.
Yeah. There's a scene where they're trying to like help him understand his past. And so he and the sort of head leader of this whole team are like in a room with Dan Stevens, and it's cool because we've seen that room before. Like we've actually seen the scene where he's like talking to his therapist and like recording everything, and you see sort of a literal skip in the feed, and so they all sort of like notice it, and they're trying to figure out what went on. And Ptolemy apparently is usually really powerful and able to sort of like force someone to let them in.
Yeah.
And Dan Stevens or Legion is saying, no, I'm trying to let you in. It's not me. And you're like, okay, what is going on? There's something else. There's someone else in his mind with him. And that's the first time you get sort of a hint of the Shadow King. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I think that adds another layer, because you spend that whole first season, and you know, ostensibly the entire show, but really that first season, trying to figure out if he's crazy or if he's super powerful. And then you also have this added layer of, is he crazy, or does he have this monster in him, or is he crazy because he has this monster in him?
Or is he lying?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's just this the unreliable narrator thing is very common in books. I don't know how common it is in the visual media.
Yeah.
Because I guess it would be kind of hard to do.
Sixth Sense is an example of that.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. But, like, David is just, like, we're basically through his eyes, and you just don't know anything.
But it's cool because they're not setting you up to be like, what? I didn't see this coming. You're meant to try to guess and figure out and look for symbols.
Yeah.
So that once you actually get to the end of the first season, it's satisfying. Not because they've tricked you, but because they've sort of given you all the information that you need to like understand, even if you didn't guess it, understand why.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I like that.
It's such a good show.
It's so good. Oh my goodness.
It's like one of my absolute favorites. I just love it so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I didn't want to watch it for so long. And then I would just like went to your house and you were like, let's watch Legion.
Yeah.
And so we just watched the first couple episodes and I was like, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. This is good stuff. I feel like a lot of Marvel stuff now is, like, even the good stuff is very easy. Like, it's sort of comfort food. Like, you just sit and you're just like, doop-a-doop-a-doop, oh, they're fighting, la la la. Yeah. It's just sort of, there's a lot of endorphins that happen. And you just
Spider-Man even. Like, that was a very good movie, the most recent Spider-Man.
Oh,
but it's definitely like, let's make everybody happy.
Yeah.
Look at all these people that you know.
But Legion is like work.
Yeah.
You know, like every second of it. Like, I forced our mom to watch a couple episodes, and she just couldn't. She was just like, it's just not, it's like chaotic and insane. But, you just have to sit
and just be okay with
stare
that.
at it and just like work while you're watching it, you know? And if you do, it pays off so good.
Oh, it's so good.
It's really interesting because I was reading that I'm never good at the numbers, but there were like several million, some like good amount of people watched the first season. And then there's like a severe drop off after the first season. And it ended up with like 300,000 people watching it, which is insane.
Wow.
But I mean, you were saying earlier about like it being made for like a very specific.
Yeah. I think that's part of the beauty of the show, that they weren't trying to write it for everybody. They were trying to write it for a very particular kind of person who likes that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And like the Marvel movies are trying to get as big a market share as possible. So they're trying to pay attention to like different countries having different ideas about like all the different themes, and like, so it has to be as vanilla is a harsh word. Like, it doesn't have to be completely vanilla, but it has to be accessible to a lot of people. And Legion is unapologetically inaccessible.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, if you want to watch me, you have to like be in it. And you have to be okay with being uncertain about what's going on. But that's what makes it cool.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that does it is that like intentionality of it, that it's not just crazy, and it's not just, I mean, they do a lot with psychedelic stuff, but it's not just like we're all on shrooms and like nonsense is happening. Everything has meaning.
Right.
You just don't know what it is.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking like Loki as an example. This might not make sense. I'm sort of thinking and talking at the same time, but like I really liked so many elements of Loki because it like sets up this really interesting like whole background of characters that have been there the whole time, that are technically even more powerful than anybody we've ever seen before, just because they can control all of time and space.
Was that all?
Yeah, but like, and so that's so intriguing, and then you get to watch this sort of variant of Loki like go through it, but then it sort of turns into, okay, and then we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do this. So like it turns into this sort of episodic sort of thing that every other heroic story usually turns into, like, oh, we've got to get over this obstacle, and we've got to get over this obstacle, and then we beat the odds and whatever. And so like the initial feeling for me was like, wow, this is interesting, and then it sort of was like, okay, I still like this, but it's not as interesting and experimental and like it doesn't like get at the same part of your brain, right? You're, like, trying to figure it out. Yeah. But Legion does that. Legion is okay. So I did get the sense though that like the first season for me was just it's so good. The second season sort of if I remember right, it sort of dropped off for me in terms of interest a little bit. The second season leans heavy into the what is real thing. Yeah. But I think you're right. I think it sort of it gets a little lost. It tries to do some interesting things. That's the one with the teeth chattering. That was cool. So it has a little bit of the problem of having like really interesting, like fascinating images and concepts, and it loses track of them a little bit. Yeah. I feel like it's still very high level TV, but like compared to the first season of itself. What's the arc of the second season? The second season is when they're in... The first season, they're like sort of fighting this government agency. The second season, they have joined the government agency. There's like a disease going around where people they just go catatonic and their like teeth are chattering, and it's really creepy and spooky and really interesting. But I think most of that arc is kind of just inside that. It's got the guy with the basket on his head. Yeah, I never understood that. Yeah, I think that season goes a little more... leans a little more towards that. I don't think it's weird for the sake of being weird, but I think there's a little more of that feel to it. More avant-garde. Because it doesn't wrap up all of that. Yeah. In like a super good way. I couldn't figure out if that person was a villain or if they were just... Yeah, sorry. So that reminded me real quick of, once, because, like when a superhero starts to sort of like understand their powers more, you're supposed to root for them. And so there's this really interesting part in the first scene where they're like escaping the government facility, and you're like, yeah, okay, he's going to use his powers. And then he starts using his powers and he starts exploding people. Yeah. And so part of you is still, oh, that's so cool that he's using these powers. But then at the same time, you're like, ew. It's also horrific. It's horrific. And I just love that, sort of those two things side by side. Yeah. Like, getting you to sort of question those other movies where you're watching them and like not really paying attention to the body count as you're sort of like celebrating this person for all their power and not really reckoning with, okay, what does that actually mean that this person has just killed 25 people in helmets that we can't see their faces? Right. But they don't do that in Legion. You can see that these are human beings, which I think is just so interesting. Yeah. I think that, so we know that Legion is ultimately a supervillain who threatens to, in one storyline, does destroy the universe. So as we're watching this, if you know that, that's an interesting thing. But I think that the show does such an interesting job with that, because as unreliable a narrator as he is, I don't know if it's Dan Stevens' portrayal or what it is, but he is incredibly sympathetic. Yeah. You spend the entire first season, I think, rooting for him. Yeah. You get to season 2 and you're still there, but then he starts to do stuff like that, like exploding people, and like he just has that edge of like, I can do it, therefore it would fix things, I'm just gonna do it. And so then you start to toy with this thing, but all the while you still sort of like him. Yeah. And
you can really see his thought process. And like he's on a trajectory to being someone who is basically omnipotent and is willing to do anything to achieve his goal. And even when you reach that point, you can see the humanity in what he's doing, and you just believe.
Yeah, he never switches over into being a caricature of a villain.
Yes.
He's always understandable.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it so much more horrific, because this is something that a human being can do.
Yeah. And I think what's like really kind of intricately balanced is that you still disagree with him.
Yeah.
Like, it's not humanizing in that you'd be like, well, that's probably what I would do, because you can still see the disordered thinking in him. And so while he is genuine, you, as someone who understands reality, can be like, I know you think that, but that's wrong.
Yeah, and that sort of brings up Sid's character, because she is sort of a proxy for the audience in many cases, right? In her relationship with him, she sort of represents this, like, this rope trying to pull him back from the edge the entire time. And it's interesting to watch her progression, because you sort of get to this point where you're like, well, she's going to have to betray him, but how is that going to happen?
Right.
And like, what's that going to do to him if she's the only thing holding him back from the edge, and she decides to betray him? Like, how are you going to stop him from destroying everything?
Yeah.
And okay, that actually brings up, was that the second season, the awful thing he does to her?
I think, oh boy, I don't remember. I think it
might have been the
third
third season,
but I'm not sure.
It might have been the third season. I can't remember.
I think you're right.
Like, that is, this is again coming from another article, so this is not my original thinking, but I definitely agree with this. Like, that was too much. Like, that sort of was, because like, if we're gonna still like root for him, not root for them as a couple, but root for him, that was just such a stark, like, it pulled me out of the narrative.
See, that I can definitely see, but I feel like it was too much. But for me, my experience of that was that it put me in like another level of discomfort within the show. Like, it didn't take me out of it. I wasn't like, that's too much. It was like, I remember talking to you while I was watching the show, where I was like, I just love them together so much, but there's just no way that they can be together after that. Like, there's just no way. And it was a really like good discomfort for me. Like, just felt like it was another step in kind of like the weird journey that they're taking you on, where like you can't accept anything, and like you're living with these characters through these completely impossible situations, and they make you as the viewer feel that way. And I thought it was a very successful thing that they did to like put you in that position. But I think a lot of people did have that reaction where it was just like, I can't.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I think we're more used to seeing death in shows, in pop culture shows, or more used to seeing, you know, even really, really violent death. But rape is just like, that's just past a particular line in media, that it's not that it never is covered, but if it is covered, it's just shocking in a way that, you know, and I think that's an interesting thing to consider. Like, why is it that we're likely to see violence, like physical, like death and things like that, than we are to see sexual violence?
Why are we more comfortable watching a murder than watching a rape, but we charge much less for the crime of rape than for the crime of murder?
Yeah, it's fascinating. But I think that's interesting. I wonder, I mean, I'm sure it was an intentional choice for them to do something like that, because he has already murdered a bunch of people, and that hasn't affected his, I mean, it's not that it hasn't affected his relationship with Sid, but it hasn't broken the relationship with Sid. So it's like, that was probably like, okay, we have to do something to break them apart. Like, we have to shatter their relationship somehow, because otherwise he can't become a supervillain. Yeah. Because he will always have that connection. And I don't remember, does he ever recognize what he's done?
He apologizes, but it's sort of like, it doesn't matter. Like, she's just completely... Yeah. Like, he did it.
Right.
Like, there's no undoing it, although he would say that there is, because that's kind of what the entire third season is about.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
But it's
still not something that he gets forgiven for.
But does he ever, like, suggest that he's like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that because of what it's done to you?
Yeah, rather than I think he does. I think he does. I mean, there are moments, once we hit the third season, we're pretty hard into him being a villain, and they're trying to, like, defeat him, basically. But you still see a lot from his perspective, and there's quite a lot of him, what appears to be genuinely, like, trying to undo the things that he has done, and like to fix the harm that he's done. He's just trying to go about it in a kind of horrific way.
Yeah. That's why he has that time mutant on his team, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's okay. So second season arc is basket head person.
Yeah, and just sort of like what is real, and like the teeth chattering.
Yeah.
They're trying to find the body of Amal Farouk.
Oh, okay.
That's right. Okay, so in the first season, I guess we're deep into spoilers now, but in the first season, we've discovered that Amal Farouk, who is the Shadow King, who is an actual character from the X-Men, has been haunting David his entire life. The end of that season, he is cast out of David.
But he goes into...
And we think he's gone. But the second season, we find out that he's not. He just took over a different person, Oliver.
Which is tragic because he has just woken out of the astral plane.
We just got him into the real world and are starting to kind of figure out how his relationship with Melanie is going to turn out and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then, he gets taken over.
But it's interesting. It almost looks like it was on purpose. Like, it almost looks like Oliver's character is like, yeah, sure, let's go on a road trip together.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
That's true. But there's also, there's also a real heavy feel that Amal makes people feel the way he wants them to.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's true.
So it's hard to know.
But given what happens later, that Farouk is really trying to stop David from villaining out, maybe that's sort of part of why Oliver... Because Oliver is a really powerful mutant too, right?
Yeah, he's a powerful psychic.
So it doesn't seem like Farouk would necessarily be able to... I'm sort of speculating a lot here, but like maybe that's part of why Oliver sort of went willingly.
Yeah, it's hard to know because Oliver is so spacey in the first season. He's like out of touch with reality. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to know what he's doing any given moment. He's just sort of like, he doesn't remember anybody. He's an intriguing character. He's spent a decade, however many years, just trapped in the astral plane and just has sort of like drifted and lost his marbles a little bit.
Yeah.
But so the Shadow King goes into him and disappears. So the second season, they've determined that Amal Farouk is looking for his body, which was entombed somewhere, because they think that if he gets his body, he'll have extra power. Like, it'll make him stronger. That sounds
familiar, yeah. Okay.
And so they're all looking for his body so they can stop him from getting it. And then there's this whole complicated thing where Sid from the future talks to David and is like, no, don't stop him from getting his body. Help him to get his body because we're going to need him to defeat this other thing.
Legion?
What is that thing, Allison?
I wonder, what could it be? Yeah.
So he and Sid ultimately are on this kind of parallel mission. Everybody's looking for the body. Yeah. But for different reasons.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. That reminds me a little bit. So the whole, Oliver and Melanie...
Melanie is Jane...
living in the astral plane together. Is that the third season then?
I think that's the third season, yeah.
Okay.
Because the end of the second season, I think Amal gets his body.
Right.
And then we figure out that Legion is a problem.
Right.
And Amal is going to help them control him. Mm-hmm. They don't want to kill him, I don't think, at this point, but they, need to control him. And he's like, nah, and he goes away.
Okay.
And then the third season is all him, with his weird commune.
Yeah.
And they're trying to find him to kill him.
Right. So I have like two images in my head. One image of the Shadow King being in like a birdcage or something.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting thing because the first season or two, we get sort of like this general idea that David is Charles Xavier's son.
Uh-huh.
But once we hit the third season, we actually see Charles Xavier.
I thought that was cool. I wasn't expecting that.
He's got Cerebro and everything. Like, we see a legit
Yeah.
Charles Xavier in the show. He's played by Harry Lloyd, who I love. He was in Brave New World, the relatively new show of Brave New World. He was one of the main characters in that, and I loved him in that. But he's Charles Xavier in this, and they do a pretty good approximation of what happens in the comics with this. In the comics, he's like not a therapist, but he's sort of like someone in authority at a mental hospital in Israel. And Gabrielle is a patient of his, and they fall in love.
Whoa.
And he like fixes her brain in a similar way.
I didn't know that.
Because she's
that
like,
is so creepy.
I know, she's traumatized and stuff, and he unlocks her brain in the way. Listen,
no,
that is just the crap he does, Allison. In Legion,
cool.
for whatever reason, they're both patients.
Okay.
They're both patients in the show. But then other than that, it's a similar thing where he sort of like, she's catatonic and he sort of like opens up her brain and all this stuff, and they fall in love and they have David. And you see all of these things kind of as flashbacks, and then we end up having a lot of time travel that happens involving all of that.
Okay. So then that's sort of what the hallways are, right?
Yes, because we have Switch, played by Lauren Tsai, and she has the power of time travel.
In hallways.
Yeah, because like she like makes a doorway with her finger and then like goes in, and then there's like a hall.
But then there's like creepy things following you.
Yeah, there's like,
I loved that.
Like gremlin-y things.
Yeah.
That like eat time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see how people deal with like time travel and like what the constraints are and like why it has to be the way it has to be and all that stuff. And like it seems like they do often end up with something like some creature that has to fix the timeline, or
that happened in Loki. Yeah,
like there's always some sort of thing preventing you from traveling through time, because
we don't want to have a million copies of the same character.
Yeah.
So let's just eat it.
We'll just eat it. So yeah, I mean, there's the 3 seasons. They all kind of like, I mean, I think it fits together, all of it, as like one big arc. Like there's an arc for each season, but ultimately it kind of goes all the way around.
Yeah, and okay, remind me, why did Melanie and Oliver end up raising
It's a whole
Sydney?
This was something that I think they dropped a little bit. I think they dropped Melanie's character.
They definitely did. She
in
was
a weird way.
Super interesting. And like in one sense it was nice that she got to actually like have a life with Oliver.
Yeah.
That was cool. But
I guess it sort of felt like she was, in the first season, what it felt like to me was that she was letting this like idealized version of Oliver hold her back.
Yeah.
And it seemed like the kind of thing where she would like discover that she was her own love all along, or something. You know what I mean? Like something, but self-actualizing to it.
But there's something really nice about, watching a character who's like grieving over someone that she thinks might be lost forever, actually getting to have that person back again. I thought that was really...
But what happens with her, like once we sort of like lose track of her, ultimately she and Oliver just sort of like take up residence in the astral plane.
But what had happened to Sydney? Like something had really... Was that because of what David did? That she was just completely hurt?
No, it was. It was when David and his weird underlings were attacking Sid and all of them, and he did something.
Okay.
No, that's it. I think that he did. I think he did, like, sort of kill her, because that was in one of those moments where he was like, it's fine. I'm going back in time. I'm going to fix all of this, so it doesn't matter what I do. And so I'm pretty sure, I think he did do something with her brain. But then her like, psyche or whatever is adrift, and Oliver finds it in the astral plane and takes her back to their little cottage, and then just like raises her, and she just has like this whole other childhood,
which was super cool. And that also sort of is a bit of foreshadowing for what happens at the very end.
Yeah.
With Legion.
Yeah.
So does that change her character at all after she sort of had this other life?
Yeah, well...
Does that help her with her trauma?
Right before you have that episode, you have the episode where... I guess maybe it's not right before. But you have an episode where you really take a deep dive into why she has the trauma that she has.
Uh-huh.
And you really kind of get to know her, like, who she is and her pain and all of that stuff. And I think that when you're watching her in those scenes where she's growing up and stuff, you're really seeing the holes that she had being filled with this new life. And so I think when she does grow up and like goes back to the real world and all that stuff, she ends up having both, like, memories of both times.
That's cool.
So then she's a dramatically different character.
Yeah.
And it allows her to
make the right
sort
choice
of show
about
grace
Legion.
to Legion, you know,
Yep.
in a way that like she just wouldn't have been able to.
Yeah, because she was extremely dependent on him for the first couple of seasons, which made sense because, you know, she's broken. She hasn't had any, like, solid relationships. She hasn't had physical contact with people. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, here comes this hero on a white horse who seems so kind and so innocent, and he can give her what she wants.
Yep.
Like, he can give her physical touch. And then he's the only person that she trusts is the person who betrays her.
Yep.
And so she's completely, like, brought back down to her knees again.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the fact that sort of Oliver and Melanie are reconstructing.
Yeah.
Literally reconstructing her.
Yeah.
And, like, helping her to, like, get up to this point where she is now not dependent on Legion. And she can make the decision that, like, is healthy for her and healthy for, like, the universe existing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never thought of that. That's so interesting.
And it gives her this, like, different kind of perspective because it's so hard in that moment to see anything other than let's just defeat him.
Yeah.
You know?
Uh-huh.
And, like, she has that kind of breath to be like, it doesn't have to be us or them.
Right.
You know? Like, we can all do this, you know?
Yeah.
And it just sort of shifts the whole dynamic.
Yeah. And if you see it sort of as a take on mental health, it's beautiful because the way to quote unquote defeat that particular kind of trauma or a particular kind of you know, if you're struggling with depression, if you're struggling with anxiety, it's not like defeating isn't the right word at all. It's learning how to live with the symptoms and learning how to manage the symptoms and learning how to sort of reframe how you view your own experiences from the past in a way that doesn't erase them, but also doesn't let them hold sway over you anymore. And that's exactly what Sid is.
Yeah.
Like, that's her whole arc.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah. What do you think about the show as, like, I don't know, like an allegory for mental health? Because it feels like that's definitely a theme throughout the whole thing, like for individual characters.
Yeah.
But, like, is there something there for, like, the whole thing?
I think there are. You could probably write a paper on it. Like, you could probably go through and see how you could make connections with everything. But, like, you know, Legion's character, Sid's character, the relationship between Oliver and Melanie, like Melanie's character, I think all have sort of aspects of working through processing, you know, again, trauma from the past, learning how to sort of deal with that and become a more healthy, like, have a healthier perspective on things that used to be your demons, like your literal demons. That's what Legion is sort of going through. And it's interesting because he never really gets to the point where he's like, aha, okay, I recognize these are the issues that I have, and I need to process these issues. It's almost like you could see the 3 seasons of Legions as an intervention for him.
Yeah.
That the characters have to, and because he's so powerful, they can't just sit him down on a couch and say, listen, Legion, we have some advice for you or whatever. But I don't know, it's interesting. Like, is that what it looks like if someone doesn't acknowledge their own underlying struggles and the things that they're facing and give that person godlike powers and see what happens? I don't know, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we're missing so much.
I know.
We've only, like, touched the surface of, like, Lenny's character and...
Yeah. Well, as I was trying to, like, sort of map out how to even have this episode, I was just like, I mean, we can't.
Yeah.
It's not possible. Because, like, even just trying to get at the plot is near impossible.
Yeah.
And then trying to look at something like Legion by just doing, like, a plot thing is missing almost the entire point of the entire show.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I guess, like, my main feeling about this episode is just to be like, watch the show.
Yeah.
You know, like, give it a chance and, like, really, like, sit down, don't have your phone.
Yeah.
Just, like, watch the show. And I feel like it fell in this pit. There was this time, and it happened with the X-Men movies and some of the MCU TV shows, where it was like, I don't know if it was because of the merger with Disney or something, but there was this sort of, like, time period where people were, like, not aware of certain Marvel things, and, like, things were really fishy about if they were a part of different universes, and everything was kind of unsettled. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this fell right into that spot and I didn't see it work in it.
Like, I
didn't either. I read that it had, like, a Super Bowl ad and stuff.
Oh, I guess
like, I don't know. That. But, like, the time slot was it's 10 o'clock on, like, a Saturday or something crazy. So it wasn't even, like, I mean, it's like a late night kind of a show, but it wasn't something that, like, wasn't prime time or anything.
I don't know. I think that was, like, when we started to not do cable.
That's another thing.
Maybe that's, like, what overlap happened when a whole bunch of the audience that would have wanted to watch Legion weren't watching typical TV commercials. Yeah. And maybe that's part of it.
You're right. That's also another kind of a trench that I think TV shows were starting to fall into. Mm-hmm. That, like, pulling the plug on cable thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I know that it started out with a decent following, but then it just dramatically dropped. And I don't know. I just feel like people didn't watch it, and I wanted to watch it because it's just, I don't think there's a single, I mean, certainly not a Marvel thing that even comes close to touching it for quality and for, like, just...
I think Fargo's a good benchmark. Like, the Fargo show is similarly high caliber, character driven, like, keeping you guessing. And you always, and maybe this is just Noah Hawley's thing, but you always are rooting for every character.
Yeah.
In a sense. Like, Martin Freeman has a character in Fargo that goes from, like, normal guy to, like, awful, terrible human being, but the entire time you're like, no, stop, no, please. You know, like, you want him to turn around, you want him to stop. And that's sort of a theme throughout Legion, this sort of idea of wanting redemption to happen, like, wanting the person to be, not just to stop what they're doing and go to jail, but for it to be fixed, for the problems to be fixed. And it's interesting because Legion's character is like, well, no, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to rewrite history and fix the problems that I had. But he's doing it in the wrong way because he's still not giving up his power.
Yeah.
He's still like, I still want to have all this control. Literally, he's trying to control everything. And then you have the other characters who are sort of, like, grassroots trying to, like, rise up and defeat him, but not... in, like, now you're going to prison, or like, now you're gonna die. It's we still want we want to fix it in the right way.
Yeah.
And
I wonder if the difference, I don't know, because, like, you're right, like, it's a weird turn and in that last season, because he just wants to go back in time and undo it all and fix it, and that's wrong. But then there's this part where it sort of turns and it's like, no, that's what we're all doing. But why is it okay when we're doing it? But I wonder if it's because, like, Sid is the one who's sort of driving that turn. And it's like she accepts that she's going to stop existing.
Yeah.
And, like, is willing to do that.
Yeah, she's not being forced. She's giving her own life up willingly.
Yeah.
Rather than sort of Legion just deciding that for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's, that last scene is just so beautiful. You know, and you sort of, are we allowed to sort of talk about the very last scene of the show?
I guess so.
Spoilers. Because you have seen it more recently, so I'm probably getting stuff wrong, so correct me. But it's basically after, you know, time has been rewritten, you still are able, Sid is still existing for a little bit longer.
Yeah, that was a really nice touch.
Yeah, so she gets to like look down at actually she and Legion both are still existing, which is interesting because this is the same guy who's done all this awful stuff.
This isn't fixed Legion.
It's not fixed Legion,
Legion,
but they both get to look down at baby Legion, at baby David, and see maybe this version of David will have a better chance because he is going to be raised by Xavier, right? Xavier is actually going to be in his life, which is very, very different from the comics. But you get to see both of them just standing next to each other, not kissing, because that would be insane. Not saying what you did was okay, and I don't think they even say, like, she doesn't even say,
she doesn't say I love you.
Yeah, but the fact that they're just standing together watching this new world start is like just so peaceful and so like so satisfying.
Yeah, which I thought was so impressive because anytime you have something like that, changing the timeline kind of thing, you just are stuck with this, okay, but all of these people that we care about are now going to not exist. That sucks.
Yeah.
And so I think it was so just smart and well done to like give that beat where they could see what they had achieved.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, you didn't just see them, like, the timeline's changed, boom.
Yeah.
You get to watch them appreciate.
Right.
What they, like, we did it, it's good.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, you get that finality with those characters.
You see David sort of accepting it, too.
Yeah.
Like, he's not railing against it and saying, no, my idea was better. He's like, okay, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't believe that this show got made.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. 3 whole
Because it's a lot of money. They put a lot of money into it. Like, it's very high production values. And, like, really, you know, Dan Stevens was already a really popular actor at that point. It's just, like, the scoring is gorgeous.
Well, I mean, we haven't even talked about the kind of music that they use.
Yeah.
Like, they use licensed music. Like, the first episode has the Rolling Stones. It has The Who. Like, all these, like, really big songs.
Yeah.
And, like, those are not cheap.
Right.
And that just goes throughout the entire show. Like, they don't cut corners on anything.
Yeah. I remember one scene in particular where Legion sort of slows down time and, like, saves the day. Where there's, like, maybe, like, there's a bullet hanging in the air and he, like, stops Sydney from being shot. I just remember really, really enjoying the details of trying to figure out how is this going to be fixed.
Yeah.
So, like, they think really deeply. The people who are writing the show think really deeply about the fights, the battles, the problems that they're facing. It's not just, let's stick a monster on the screen and have people shoot at it and punch it. It's more complicated. It's almost like they're choreographing a dance when they're doing scenes like that. Like, often they are literally choreographing dances, too. Yeah, and you know what's interesting? It felt like that first time that the characters start dancing, like in the first season, they're like weeding out people. They're like, okay, if you can't handle this, you're not going to like the rest of the show.
Allison, it's the first episode.
Is it really?
It's the first episode.
Then
I forgot
that's
that.
What they're doing.
I forgot that when I rewatched the first episode. I was like, they do a Bollywood dance the very first episode. You're right. They're just weeding people out. You're right.
You're not going to like this.
If you can't get into this, oh my word. The characters sing. They have like extended singing scenes and like that kind of stuff can be so pandering.
Yeah.
Like, it can be so, like, oh, let's see what happens if we get the actors to sing. But it's all, it just works.
Yeah.
And it's all in service to the show.
Right. Yeah, it's making a point or highlighting an issue or, yeah. So good. I love the show.
So, how do you feel about the show, Allison?
I love it.
I love it, too.
It's I don't know. I don't know if I would say it's, like, number one necessarily, because I don't think very hard about other things that I've seen. But it's just, I love it so much. Like, I can't describe to you how good it is.
Really well done. Super, super interesting. A lot of, like, brave choices.
And a lot of sort of really interesting philosophical ideas even. And, you know, again, sort of, and the mental health angle of it is just also really, really fascinating. And understanding that people are complicated and no one can be reduced to just one particular character trait. and how relationships change when certain people make certain kinds of choices, and how you can be a friend with someone who's completely off kilter and unexpected, like Lenny, and how that person can change if they're cut off from this, because that's another codependent relationship. Yeah. Dan and Lenny in both directions, because they're both, like Lenny will buy drugs and sort of keep Dan Stevens' character,
David,
like sort of chained in that particular addiction, but he also sort of supports her making really, not optimal choices about her life. And so, like, as soon as their relationship is sort of severed because she literally dies, then you get to see, okay, what does this look like when this person is no longer sort of needing to lean on another person to, like, help them live their life? Like, how does she function now? And I thought that was really interesting to follow her through. Like, she was sort of resurrected bodily, right?
In kind of like an awful way. But
yeah. Was that the Shadow King who did that?
Yeah.
That was really interesting to sort of watch. Was she, like, what happened to her at the very end? I don't remember.
I think she killed herself.
Yeah. I didn't remember that part. Because I know she was in the commune.
Yeah, she was in the commune, and she had a trauma because something happened with Switch doing the time stuff. And her girlfriend had a baby, which was a whole other surreal kind of a thing. And because time was, like, speeding up, Lenny, like, watched moments of her daughter
I forgot about that. Yeah.
And sort of, like, missed it all, but also sort of saw stuff. And so that just, like, put her into a really deep, like,
my
grief.
Goodness. Yeah.
And then she got pissed at David because he was the cause of that. And, like, she wouldn't let him control her anymore and that kind of thing. So it was that tone to it, and she killed herself so that
he couldn't control her anymore. Yeah. That's fascinating. So I'm trying to think of a a symbolic analogy there. Missing time. If she's addicted to drugs and she sort of has to struggle with that, that's sort of an interesting picture of what that might look like.
Yeah, that's true.
For family relationships. So the Shadow King was sort of another interesting character because, similar to David, he keeps you guessing about his true intentions. Like, way into the series, I was still thinking, oh, okay, but is he still going to betray everybody? Is he still going to, like, evil out? Because he says he loves David, but does he actually love David, or does he love David's power?
That part where, like, he first takes over, you see the Shadow King's perspective of when he first takes over David.
Yeah.
And, like, it's, like, inside his psyche, and it's just him in, like, a rocking chair singing to the baby, and it's just so cute.
Yes, I know. Because that's not what you're expecting. You're expecting the whole time, this person has traumatized David
and
his entire childhood.
He has.
Right. But it's, like, the whole, the terrorist character that you were mentioning from the comic, like, him sort of understanding how to love this other human being instead of just trying to control him. And sort of, again, a theme that keeps happening, like David learning that you can't love someone if you control them. You can't, like, the minute he commits that awful act to Sydney, like, that's why love is broken, because you have just done something. You've taken something from someone, like, someone's free will basically away from them in that moment. And, like, that cannot be love if you're doing that to them. I don't know where I was going with that, but...
We were talking about Farouk.
Farouk, yeah. The actor, I think, does such a good job of sort of...
wonderful.
Yeah, because it's the same sort of thing where you're like, can I trust you? Do I trust you? Like, just the facial expressions that he has.
Yeah. And he's another person, I think, that, like, you want to be able to like.
Yeah.
Like David. Like, you like and trust David longer than you should.
Yeah.
Because he's just a likable person. And I think the same kind of thing happens maybe opposite.
Yeah, they sort of have different trajectories.
Farouk, because, like, as soon as you see that version of him, with that actor, Naveed, you're just like, well, I like this guy. He's fun and he's cool and, like, intriguing and stuff. But you also know that, I mean, like, he's just been pounded into your brain that he's evil.
Right.
Like, evil incarnate. And you find out that he sort of is. Like, he's not that, but also he's, like, changed. It's all so complicated.
Yeah. Right. Like, and his motivations seem initially, too, like, to even work with them is still, like, I don't want the world to end because I want to live. Not necessarily because I'm a good person.
Yeah.
But then, you're right, like, the scenes with him, like, learning to love David also have this additional, like, everything's complex. Every character is complicated in this entire series. Like, with the exception of maybe the Carries.
You don't like the Carries?
I found it very difficult to understand them.
Yeah.
Like, I think you learn more about the male Carrie. Like, because you see him, I felt like you saw him more often. And, like, he sort of had other things to do. Like, he was setting up all of the equipment and everything.
Yeah, he's the thing with the Carries are that they share a body. That's like the mutant power. And it's not super clear if, like, they really are two separate people who were combined, or if, like, they're if it's like a Siamese twin or conjoined twins kind of a thing.
Well, they lived on other sides of the world.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, she was, like, in, I don't know, maybe China. I don't know exactly the country. And then he was growing up in the United States, and they, like, just were aware of each other somehow. And then as soon as they were able to physically be in the same place, they were like, oh, we're going to merge. It was very weird.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Maybe I'm making that up, but I think that's what happened. But yeah,
but we do see the male Carrie much more.
Yeah.
Because he, I think, is the primary physical person. And it's kind of interesting because he's older than she is, because apparently she only ages when she's out of the body.
I forgot about that. That is cool.
It is a weird, it's probably the more unsettling of the powers that we see.
Yeah.
And just, like, hard to understand, and, like,
because they have a very deep bond.
Yeah.
It almost feels romantic sometimes.
Yeah, which is awkward
for
lots of reasons. But yeah, it is hard. But I did end up really appreciating them. And you see more from her in, like, the second half of the show, because things get a little more physical and less science-y.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess that's sort of her role, is, like, to fight people and stuff. So she shows up a little more there.
And doesn't he get sort of beat up and he has to
Well, that's another funny thing, because she keeps getting beat up. And if they combine, when she's injured, he takes on the injury, and if she goes out of him again, she's fine. So it's like he can heal her, but only by taking on the injury himself.
Now that's an interesting analogy.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah,
there's a lot,
you could take another
stuff there.
Mental health perspective on that too. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Taking on the pain of other people to help them heal.
But, like, all that whole team is new characters. Probably just, like, largely as another way to kind of keep them separate from the X-Men universe, so they don't have to mess with all of the... New in the sense
that they're not in the
They're
comics?
New to this show.
They're not in the comics at all?
I don't think they're in the comics. I think they're all brand new.
Well, that's why they're sort of odd, I guess.
Yeah.
Although there are a lot of weird mutants in the comics.
There are a lot of weird mutants. Yeah. But the Carries, I remember the first several episodes, I was just like, what? What is happening? Like, I could not, because female Carrie would just, like, appear, and I'd just be like, is she, like, his imaginary friend? Or, like, what the heck is happening?
Yeah.
And then finally, I think, like, in the second season, there's an episode where they sort of, like, break down what the deal is.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But until then, I was like, I don't understand what's happening with the two of them.
Right. I think they lean into that. Like, the whole show leans into, I'm okay with the audience not getting this.
Yeah.
Until later, if at all. So this is going back to Lenny, and I'm wondering if when she, like, initially died and she was sort of stuck in the wall, if that was a direct reference to Han Solo, because the way she's styled in that looks so
in the
similar.
Carbonite.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder.
Because it's sort of like, because if that's the case, then the symbolic meaning might be, you know, Han Solo, it looks like he's out of the narrative, but then he comes back. So it's like, okay, is this sort of hinting at that?
Oh, that's interesting. Cool. I didn't think about that. Yeah, I like that.
Are we missing any other important characters?
They do stuff with Ptonomy, but I don't find it to be particularly successful. They didn't develop him
as much as I wanted.
They didn't develop him as much, and, like, halfway through they, like, sort of kill him, but then he's, like, a computer for a while.
Oh, I forgot.
But they don't really do anything with that.
Yeah, that was
It's sort of like they're they're sort of venturing into sci-fi and then decide they don't really want to mess with that.
Yeah. I thought he was sort of stuck in his own head at one point.
Well, that's sort of what it is. It's like his body was dying, and then those like robot ladies took him to the mainframe.
I forgot about the robot ladies.
And they put him inside the computer. And so you see his perspective a couple times of him being inside the computer. And then they give him a body.
Okay.
But he's not like himself. It's a whole, I don't know.
Well, that's upsetting.
They do a lot with him, but not like,
not
well.
Yeah.
So that's a weakness.
Unfortunate. Like the characters that get short shrift.
David's sister.
Oh, right. I forgot she even existed. Yeah.
She's a really interesting.
She's the damsel in distress.
She is, and she's also the unconditional love for David. And I think she gives a good glimpse of the family member of someone who is that like chaotic and
right. Yeah.
She loves him, but she doesn't know what to do with him, and like there's just some stuff that happens there, and like his perception of her is interesting. And there's sort of that flash memory of the golden retriever and both of them walking through a field together. Yeah,
that they keep going to.
It's a beagle.
A beagle. I'm sorry. Why do I? My memories have been messed with. They could have done the same kind of thing with her that they did with Sid and that they did with, other characters, where they break free from their at least narrative dependency on this other character. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think the sister depended on him. I don't think that she was like, chained to him in terms of who she actually was, but like in terms of the storytelling.
Yeah, like the only reason she's a part of the story is for him.
That's really frustrating. Because in every other aspect, the characters don't have that flaw.
But you sort of have to wonder about like it being purposeful again, like how Sid is only his girl in the first season.
Yeah.
Because she is his only family, and like family is such like this thing for him that he's like working through. And so you sort of wonder if like there's some element to the way that they treat the sister that's like intentional in that way.
Like it's painting a picture of how he views family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for talking about Legion with me.
It's one of my favorite shows. If you haven't seen it, go see it. At least, okay, you have to give it, if you decide you're going to try it out and you're not sure, you have to give it at least 3 episodes.
Yeah.
Because the first episode, you're going to be like, this is odd. I'm not sure if I like this. Mm-hmm. But as long as you sort of try to give it a little bit of a chance beyond the first episode, I think you're going to like it.
And I think, like, if you know, like, we are telling you, it goes somewhere. Like, you can now know that it's not, like, say, Lost, where like it promises things that it doesn't super deliver. Mm-hmm. Like from our perspective, it delivers.
Definitely.
So watch the show. And next time on this show, we're going to be talking about the X-Men animated series again. We're going to be doing the Phoenix Saga, aka 18,000 episodes that I've seen 100 times. Thank you to Prophetic Music for our theme song. Previously on X-Men is brought to you by the Radio Meanwhile Network. Other shows on the network include 90s Music Got Me Like, This Endorian Life, and 9021 Here We Go. Follow us on Facebook or Twitter at Previously on X. Please rate, subscribe, or share this show wherever you get your podcasts. And thanks for my twin sister Allison for joining.
You're welcome.
See you next time.